the first point is that climate is both a dominant context for the rule of law, especially the environmental rule of law, and also a driver of actions to advance it. This is because of the injustices around climate impacts and needed action. Years of unsustainable consumption choices, production patterns, and finance flows have resulted in a degraded planet and growing inequity, ill health, and regression into poverty. Climate impacts are a threat multiplier and have a destabilizing impact on options for a country's development, can lead to conflict, and aggravate structural inequalities and existing grievance among communities over resources, and add to a growing trust deficit. In this context, the rule of law is not merely a tool for governance, but a foundational element for transformative, inclusive, and just climate action, which can guide us towards a sustainable and equitable future where no one is left behind, as envisaged in SDG 16 Target 7. The acknowledgement and integration of environmental and human rights has accelerated in the light of climate change concerns and biodiversity loss, and the global recognition of the human right to a healthy environment, especially given climate and environment-induced migration, which impacts women, boys and girls disproportionately. Individuals, especially those from marginalized groups, including women and girls, vulnerable communities, can challenge injustices and seek redress when environmental rule of law is used to facilitate access to justice for those affected by climate change. Some of these findings can be found in UNEP's latest global assessment on environmental rule of law, which is listed in the SDG 16 library. The second point is that gender-responsive climate actions are not aspirational. They exist, are necessary, and strategic to build adaptive and resilient societies.
I just about to say that.
From
I
a
don't want
development
broadcasting.
perspective, addressing future risks involves addressing today's vulnerability to climate variability, planning for impacts to enhance resilience of people, communities, countries, and regions. Women are not just victims of climate change, they are agents addressing climate change. They are frequently leaders in sustainable practices, agents of change for equitable climate action, and staunch defenders of land, water, nature, and community. The same is true for persons with diverse gender identity.
Yes.
Our research with the OHCHR finds that together with women, these marginalized groups are leading environment and climate actions at all levels, but their voice, agency, and participation are under-supported, under-resourced, undervalued, and under-recognized, even though they make environmental action more effective. Differentiated contributions of all genders in our conversations and decision-making on climate action specifically, and environmental action more broadly, is a must to build resilient societies. Given that climate change provides context and drives environmental rule of law, and gender-responsive climate actions exist as necessary and powerful climate responses, rule of law can enable transformative and gender-responsive climate action if it is informed by gender-disaggregated data and rooted in understanding of gender imbalances, if it is accompanied by a strengthening of the institutions and their capacities to enable and promote a more just political, economy, and equitable social systems, if laws address not only emissions reduction, climate adaptation, and environmental protection, but also ensure access to distribution of resources and resources generally is not done in a discriminatory manner based on gender or other social economic factors. Laws need to provide for equal treatment, protection, empowerment, and fair opportunities, and equitable participation in environmental governance for all. The representation of women in environmental institutions must be increased beyond just the formal. They must have power to set agendas and the resources to implement them. Further, specialized environmental enforcement, particularly in the development of capacity building institutions, needs to grow. This will support SDG 16 and make it a movement with real momentum. Finally, we need to pay attention to and engage with non-formal norms and other legal realities, given the prevalence of legal pluralism in climate change and gender discourses. These are sometimes double-edged swords that can facilitate or hinder the realization of the environmental rule of law ideal. So in conclusion, by advocating for and implementing laws and policies that address the intersection of gender and climate change and the inherent structural inequities that increase vulnerability, we pave way for a more inclusive and resilient future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm opening the floor. Now we have very little time, so I would really be grateful if those who've asked to speak could be brief. And I'm very pleased to give the floor to the Permanent Representative of Austria to deliver a statement on behalf of the Group of Friends of the Rule of Law. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you so much. I'll try to be brief, but group statements always have this tendency of being slightly long, so bear with me, please. It's my great pleasure to deliver these remarks on the Group of Friends of the Rule of Law, comprising 52 member states. Let me first thank Italy, DESA, and IDLO for bringing us together ahead of the review of SDG 16 in the framework of the HLPF in July. Sometimes we hear that the rule of law is a vague concept without clear meaning. Now this group, we don't agree. To us, it's crystal clear. Rule of law means consistent and equal application of laws. It means everyone must adhere to the rules. It means clear and predictable procedures. It means clearly known consequences for violations and equal access to justice. These parameters actually can be measured. And unfortunately, last year's SG report saw a global decline in the rule of law. We concur with this assessment. What difference does it make if rule of law is applied in our everyday lives or not? Well, it makes every difference, because rule of law and access to justice are key components for life in dignity, not only for individuals, but also for entities and states, whether on the national or international level. The rule of law is a cornerstone of society, and it is for that reason also recognized as a core objective for the 2030 Agenda. In our view, the rule of law, if applied coherently, generates conditions for lasting peace, security, realization of human rights, economic development, and social progress. If our intention is to build more peaceful, just, and inclusive societies and a sustainable common future on our planet, as we heard from our panelists, the rule of law must be the firm and unwavering foundation for our efforts. Colleagues, an important sub-target of SDG 16 is equal access to justice for all. Now, justice systems must put people at the center to address their needs. People only trust and accept a system in which they can expect to be treated fairly. Equal access to justice can be hindered by institutional barriers or lack of awareness of the existence of certain services. The latter can be strengthened through means of technology now. Digitalization, for instance, can make the right to legal aid more accessible and affordable. At the same time, human rights, including the right to a fair trial and the right to be free from arbitrary interference with privacy, must not be jeopardized by the use of technology. This was also elaborated in last year's 6th Committee debate on using technology to advance access to justice. Some institutional or systemic barriers might pose a challenge. Geographical barriers can be overcome by the use of applications that provide legal information and counseling to individuals. The mere provision of guidance and procedures and templates for court action can enable individuals to seek justice easier. Digitalization of traditional court paperwork can make justice more accessible for younger generations. In general, we must be sensitive of generational differences in interaction with technology. Younger generations will participate more readily in decision-making processes through their respective platforms that they know well from their everyday use. Outreach through social media can facilitate broader engagement among societies. But age, of course, is not the only factor that must be considered. To ensure that all individuals, including marginalized groups, can participate, we also need gender and culture-sensitive language. Another important approach to enhance access to justice is the provision of legal services by professionals for people who are simply unable to afford them. Coordination between individuals and law firms should be improved through official bodies to facilitate pro bono activity, and states should encourage such pro bono services. Turning to guiding question 2, we'd like to stress that justice gaps can only be identified through accurate and comprehensive data. Resources can then be allocated to those areas where they are needed most. Reliable data on justice gaps can initiate reforms of the system, and effective outputs of the justice system can be improved through constant review of different parameters. Without such a review, the risk of advantages for certain groups remains high. Permit me to briefly touch upon one important issue: the fight against corruption. Corruption undermines people's trust in institutions and the state as a whole. Fight against corruption must be the bedrock of our efforts to promote the rule of law and implement the 2030 Agenda. In this regard, it's essential to build upon existing instruments, and there are some, such as the UN Convention Against Corruption. And we should make best use of institutions such as the International Anti-Corruption Academy. Effective implementation in national jurisdictions requires very specific capacity building and cooperation between states. We should also make best use of initiatives such as the Stolen Asset Recovery Initiative, which supports efforts to deny safe havens for corrupt funds and facilitates a more systematic return to proceeds of corruption. In closing, let me reiterate that the group of Friends of the Rule of Law staunch support for the achievement of SDG 16 through strengthening the rule of law and access to justice. We stand ready to adopt innovative approaches in that regard, because we are convinced that the rule of law remains the key enabler of just, peaceful, and inclusive society with strong institutions and sustainable developments. We will be a partner for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now invite the Permanent Representative of Liberia to deliver a statement on behalf of the Justice Action Coalition. Thank you.
I have the honor to speak on behalf of Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, France, Germany, Indonesia, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Portugal, Sao Tome and Principe, Sierra Leone, Sweden, and my own country, Liberia. Madam Chair, we represent the Justice Action Coalition, a multi-stakeholder cross-regional coalition championing equal access to justice for all as part of SDG 16. The Justice Action Coalition believes that access to justice is best understood as the ability of people to resolve and prevent their justice problems and to use justice as a platform which enables them to participate in their economies and societies. Madam Chair, this year, we are collectively reviewing SDG 16 and negotiating a pact for the future. And yet, despite being past the midway point of the 2030 deadline, we remain far off track to achieve Goal 16. In fact, we find ourselves in the midst of intersecting and compounding challenges which can only be solved through a concerted and collaborative approach. This year's SDG 16 high-level conference, followed by the high-level political forum and the summit of the future, present unique opportunities for us to reimagine a peaceful, just, and inclusive future, a future where people and their needs are placed firmly at the center of justice systems, policies, and services. To this end, we must, one, harness the multiplier effect of justice to achieve the SDGs. 2, invest in people-centered justice for realizing peaceful, just, and inclusive societies. And 3, ensure that we leave no one behind by taking a people-centered approach to justice. Madam Chair, with just 7 years left to achieve the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, we are left with no choice but to think and act exponentially. Justice is by now well recognized as a critical enabler for achieving other SDGs. When justice is absent, injustice prevails. And, Madam Chair, injustices come at a great loss. It is costly for the individual through the loss of income arising directly from an injustice or indirectly through the expensive and oftentimes consuming process of seeking redress, or both. Injustice is also costly on the macro level through the increased risk of conflict and the adverse effects on education and healthcare, amongst others. It also weakens public trust and reduces GDPs. People centered justice can increase the levels of trust between people and institutions, thereby strengthening the legitimacy of governments. By increasing participation and inclusivity, people centered justice can strengthen democratic institutions. It can mitigate the threat of authoritarianism and conflict, thus enabling peace. Even in contexts where human rights conversations are difficult, it opens up the space to create platforms for human rights engagement by focusing on fair outcomes for all people. Second, we must invest effectively in equal access to justice for all. We are in the midst of intersecting crises. Countries across the world are facing resource crunch. We need innovative and effective ways of achieving the 2030 agenda. People-centered justice ensures effective deployment of resources into justice solutions that work, are scalable, and sustainable. By taking a data-driven and evidence-based approach, people-centered justice pushes justice actors to think beyond the traditional approach to rule of law and justice, which is often focused on processes. Its focus on fair outcomes for people strengthens trust between people and the state. Its emphasis on cross-sectorial approaches where justice actors work with health, employment, immigration, education, climate, and other formal and informal actors to prevent and resolve people's justice problems is critical for achieving the SDGs within our limited resources. We must, therefore, act urgently and decisively to invest in this approach to accelerate the attainment of the 2030 Agenda. Last but not the least, to truly achieve equal access to justice for all by 2030, we need to proactively reach those most at risk of being left behind. Madam Chair, justice needs are not randomly distributed. The world over, there are groups of people that are at increased risk of suffering injustices and their impact or require specific support in their justice journeyings. Illustratively, evidence from a recent report by the World Justice Project indicates that women are less likely to resolve their legal problems and more likely to face hardships. Similarly, in 70% of their countries surveyed, people living in poverty experience more legal problems than those who are not living in poverty. Therefore, we must reach the furthest behind first. By taking a data-driven approach, people-centered justice helps us in identifying those most at risk of being left behind and understanding the experiences of seeking justice. Its evidence-based approach provides innovative and scalable solutions, such as empowering people, simplifying legal and administrative processes, providing community services, and partnering with multi-stakeholders across formal and informal systems. In closing, Madam Chair, throughout the first half of the development agenda, these principles of putting people at the center of justice system, policies, and services have been well articulated. They have now been endorsed by over 60 countries. Now, in the second half of this development agenda, building off the momentum of this SDG 16 high-level conference, we have the unique opportunity to put these principles to practice. This is critical to harness the potential and to achieve equal access to justice by all by 2030. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. We are already a little over time, but I've been allowed to have just a small number of additional speakers. And as you're not speaking on behalf of groups, I'll be very grateful if you could really limit just to 2 minutes. And the next speaker is the permanent representative of Romania.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Moderator. And I will be very brief, actually, because I think my colleague from Austria also spoke on behalf of my country. But I want to acknowledge the importance of this conversation that we are having, because it's not quite often that we were able to place rule of law the center of our efforts. And we know for a fact that sustainable development cannot and doesn't happen in a vacuum. We need strong institutions, starting from the basic fact that, involving human capacity and very strong institutions. Rule of law, I think, is a prerequisite. And I have the feeling that probably we underestimate the importance of rule of law in our conversations. So I applaud this meeting, this focus on this issue. And of course, hopefully we will continue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the representative of the Netherlands.
Thank you very much. We would like to align ourselves with the statement delivered by Liberia on behalf of the Justice Action Coalition and the statement delivered by Austria on behalf of the Group of Friends of the Rule of Law. We're also speaking in our national capacity to stress the importance the Kingdom of the Netherlands attaches to this meeting and to SDG 16. SDG 16 is a critical enabler and accelerator for all other SDGs, but it's far from its realization. The Justice for All report of 2019 showed that 5.1 billion people lack meaningful access to justice, and this number has been on the rise ever since, further exacerbated by the global pandemic and economic crises. There's therefore an urgent need for new transformative approaches that put people at the center of justice. We must seek to prevent and resolve people's justice problems by transforming institutions, simplifying processes, and making services accessible. There's an urgent need to break down barriers to justice and restore trust in society and institutions meant to serve the people. Innovation within the justice sector is therefore a must, because conventional ways of justice service delivery have proven to be unable to reach all people suffering from justice challenges. We support our partners in exploring and piloting new ways of delivering justice services that are more cost-effective and scalable. This way, a greater number of people can be reached with the available resources. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I give the floor now to the permanent representative of Mexico.
Señora Presidenta.
Madam Chair, distinguished colleagues, for Mexico, the presence of organized crime requires a change to the structures that have enabled their growth for so long. The lack of opportunities for employment, education, and poverty has consequences for social cohesion. My country believes in the need to strengthen the rule of law and access to justice by offering innovative responses that are people-centered. In the national context, Mexico has set up empowerment programs in order to offer education, employment, and legal assistance to vulnerable groups with a gender perspective. In the international context, we welcome the growing awareness of the need to deal with these challenges from their structural roots, and highlighting the need to close the gap between those policies that are only focused on criminal justice and those that seek to achieve full sustainable development in the economic, social and environmental spheres. In order to achieve greater efficiency in our joint responses, we should build on the existing international instruments such as the Merida Convention and the Palermo Convention. In this regard, I would like to highlight the joint work by the governments of Mexico and Italy in order to bring together these agendas, as in the paper measures to address corruption involving groups of organized crime as part of the conference of the Merida Convention. I wish to conclude by reiterating Mexico's commitment to continue seeking innovative solutions in order to address the many challenges threatening the rule of law and limiting access to justice, both nationally and internationally. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm pleased to give the floor to the permanent representative of Costa Rica.
Querida
Dearest Jan, I would like to thank the organizers for convening this timely meeting, and I wish to highlight the presence and participation of the President of the Supreme Court of Justice of Costa Rica, Orlando Aguirre. There is no better roadmap towards a more peaceful and prosperous world than the 2030 Agenda, and there is no greater catalyst for the SDG 16 plus in this transformation. Costa Rica's commitment to SDG 16 is unequivocal. 2/3 of the global population, however, lack meaningful access to justice. Justice is the bedrock upon which equitable and inclusive, resilient and sustainable development can be built for all. Costa Rica agrees with the panelists that we should put people at the core of our justice systems, with professional systems that are designed in order to offer solutions and services to help us achieve just results. Costa Rica is one of the members of the group Pathfinders and invites states to be part of the project called the Great Challenge on Justice. It offers a platform for the exchange of innovative practices and for data gathering, for formulating policies that are evidence-based, and on the efficient use of resources in order to break down and link up silos and to transform justice systems. Justice is the lighthouse that guides us on the path to equality, peace, and dignity for each individual and community. Without justice, there is no true freedom or dignity for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our last speaker is the representative of the UNODC. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Excellencies. Thank you very much for giving the floor to UNODC, which is one of the partners of this conference on driving progress of SDG 16, which is really at the heart of UNODC mandate. As we've heard today, the progress towards SDG 16 is worryingly slow and in some cases even moving in the wrong direction. Violence is rising and the nature of conflicts is evolving. Trafficking of persons appears more hidden than before, and the presence of corruption and existence of weak institutions allow transnational organized crime to flourish. From 2015 to 2021, organized crime was responsible for as many deaths in this period as all armed conflicts combined. Children continue to experience high level of crime and violence, including online sexual exploitation and abuse. So in short, the current trajectory is highly concerning. UNODC has just released the latest national data on SDG indicators for which we are custodians, and they are now available on the UNODC data portal. We encourage you to consult this portal as a global reference point for international statistics on crime, criminal justice, and drugs. Through the SDG 16 survey initiative, UNODC, UNDP, and OSCHR, and with their partners, are collaborating to promote data collection on SDG 16 indicators to countries and providing capacity development and training on better measuring SDG 16's progress. In 2023, in line with our corporate strategy, we've been supporting, requesting member states in enhancing criminal justice system, creating new policies to reduce prison overcrowding, strengthening prison management, and supporting rehabilitation and integration in prison settings. But we've also reinforced legal and institutional frameworks against corruption, incorporating anti-corruption measures in all development efforts, and cooperating across borders to halt illicit financial flows and restore public trust in full and effective implementation of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, the UNCAC, the only international binding instruments dedicated, was adopted 20 years ago. In line with the important resolution adopted last December on equal access to justice for all, UNODC has supported 37 member states in advancing access to justice, in particular by strengthening access to legal aid and the responsible use of technology in the criminal justice in compliance with human rights principles. As was presented in the UNODC UN Women 2023 Femicide Report, globally, nearly 89,000 women and girls were killed intentionally in 2022, the highest yearly number recorded in the past 2 decades. While the overall number of homicide globally began to fall in 2022, after a spike in 2021, the number of female homicide is not decreasing. And therefore, in 2023, UNODC has assisted 8 countries in implementing crime prevention and criminal justice responses to gender-based violence against women, focusing on advisory services to support legal and policy framework, capacity building for justice, criminal justice practitioners, and enhancing the institutional coordination. Madam Chair, organized crime and its urgent threats stand in the way of more sustainable long-term responses and interventions to tackle root cause of instability and underdevelopment. Allow me to congratulate Italy for driving the process through the adoption, as was mentioned today, of an International Day Against Transnational Organized Crime. To help victims of crime ensure accountability and reduce future violence, every member of society must be guaranteed the same unhindered right to timely justice. And UNODC stands ready to support you in this pursuit. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think, as has been said this afternoon, it's not often that we have rule of law at the center of discussions, and I'm very pleased that we have had so many speakers. I'm sorry that we've had to close this panel now, and anyone who has not been able to speak, please submit your statement on the e-statements platform, and we will include it in the record. And certainly at IDEALO, we agree that there's no greater catalyst for sustainable development and peace than access to justice. And I think we've heard everyone talk about people-centered justice and what does it mean? It means justice delivering for people, understanding their needs and responding to them, and begins at the local level. And we must strengthen the grassroots to drive change in communities and increase trust. We heard about data, innovative approaches, multi-sectoral approaches, and whole of society partnerships. Investment in the rule of law at both national level and in ODA. And I would just like to finish by quoting Justice Gomez, who said at the beginning, never have a passive approach to challenges. And also, as we heard our civil society colleagues say this morning, move from rhetoric to action. Thank you all very much.